pointing right there.
I'm like, I'm looking down.
It's actually just you. We want to see all your reactions.
The whole time.
All right, y'all. What I'll do is we'll eventually have these shut so that, you know, the outside noise, that's the beauty part of this side room. Well, look, for those of you who I haven't had a chance, my name's Courtney Fricky. I put these on. We have 4 of these that we do every month. So we've got our main meetings that are in Covington, and then that's like our main one. It's at night, side room of a hotel room. We've got, you know, basically we bring in practitioners, so people who are doing the business that are local and regional, and then we bring in professionals. Bob's going to come talk to you in a bit. Bob's a real estate specific CPA, so we've had him come and speak on, you know, as a real estate investor, what do you need to know, right, tax-wise. So we kind of usually cater to those 2 things. What we don't want to bring in is a traveling salesman. My inbox is full of people wanting to come in. I could probably feed a small country with what they're trying to, all the emails I get. But anyway, long story short is, our goal here is for us to be able just to learn, so that as a group, we're all wanting to build wealth through real estate, or maybe you're wanting to help clients who are aspiring to build wealth through real estate. So we have our main meetings, which are once a month on Tuesdays, and then the other 3 are what we call our ancillary meetings. So this is the lunch and learn, like real estate 101, which for a long time, we've been doing these meetings for years, since 2018. These lunch and learn meetings came because maybe we go over some topics that people are like, hey, I want to know maybe some more general, like frequently asked questions. For example, how do you fund deals? You know, sometimes at the meetings we talk about that, right? But there's a level here. So these meetings, every year there's 12 topics we go through, and we literally just go through them. So we're now to the point of the funding part, and we're going to keep, you know, we'll have each month we build on those things. But these are great meetings to come to. We now have started filming these to put up on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked it out yet, CourtneyTNK.com. The top right link is our YouTube channel. The top left link is the upcoming meetings. So we do have our next meeting. So our 4 meetings, it's the main meeting, which is educational and networking. Then we have the deal making meeting. It's a Zoom call where literally all we do is we show, here's some available deals that people have. So like real estate agents will bring some deals, or even wholesalers or other landlords. Like I recently just sold a deal. Last Friday, I sold a deal that was fully gutted, a property that I own, but I didn't want to go through a gutted project like that because my big focus is Rome right now. I flipped a lot in the past and stuff like that, so I said, you know what? So I sold it to what? Another investor, right? So there's many different types of deals, things like that. So we have our deal making meeting. We have the lunch and learns, and then we have in Hammond every month. We have 2 different. We alternate between 2 different types of meetings. This month is going to be the round table. Basically, it's as if no one got up and spoke today, and we just went around and said, hey guys, let's talk through maybe something that's a wall for you that you're trying to overcome. Or, you know, what are you struggling with? What are you, you know, and it's not like it's a therapy session, but it's like, hey, groupthink is really powerful, right? We go around and we're, you know, because almost Bob and I are almost always there. So he's a real estate specific CPA. He's an investor himself, first and foremost. But he's also a real estate specific CPA. So maybe it's like, hey, let's look at it from the tax side of it, of how it's going to impact you. Whatever that looks like. Hey guys, come on in. Feel free to pick a seat. We got plenty of them. And so with that being said, we've got these meetings that happen every month. You're welcome to join us. We filmed 2 of them. So like this one's getting recorded, and then the one on the main one, the Covington one, gets recorded as well. Those get uploaded to our YouTube channel. With that being said, next month, hey y'all, how's it going? So next month, one of the big things is we have, I believe it's August 13th. You know what? I usually make a note. Can you guys check? Can you see if August 13th is the second Tuesday?
Today, it's August now.
Yeah.
You see, can you tell I'm already having one of those days? I came in September 13th.
Yeah, 2 days before deadline.
So before the deadline, she just said. So September 13th is our next main meeting in Covington. I've invited Jack Sternberg out of New Orleans to come and speak on how to build wealth with notes. Notes are mortgages. You don't have to be a bank to have notes. So basically, for example, Justin does this a lot. Justin will get land deals at a great deal. And so then what Justin does is he'll buy them with cash, and then he will sell them to maybe the neighbor or someone else on payments, right? They put money down and they make payments. He just created a note, right? Guess what he also doesn't have? He doesn't have a tenant. He has a borrower, right? And so most people who are building wealth chase it through two ways, either through interest or rent, right? We talk a ton about the rent side. I've been looking for a while, someone, and I'm really happy to bring Jack in. He is based out of New Orleans, but he has been a prolific teacher on the note industry. And he's been in retirement, so I've coaxed him out of retirement to come and talk about it. So that's going to be September 13th. He's going to talk about it where it's the interest side, so you can get an idea from that. Trust me, I know many people who started the tenant route, and they said, no, I don't want to deal with that, but I still want to build wealth with that passive income. So we've got that coming up. So recording10k.com, that's a digital business card for me. At the top left link, that's where you can find the upcoming information. Or however you found out about us today, stick with that. We've got meetup.com, our website, and then obviously we're on Facebook, and we share it on there. But with that being said, this is a topic, so today we're going to talk about how do you get your funding for your first or your next deal. This is a topic that stops most people from doing anything, right? Everyone, it's like it's the big elephant standing in the way, when the reality here is people are all the time doing real estate investing with either little to no money or not their own money. The question becomes, what separates them from you? And I'm a huge believer that is just education. It's just a know-it-all, right? It's the understanding. And so before I sit down, look, my significant other bought their very first home yesterday as a primary residence. And what they thought would never come for another 5, 6, 7 more years, it was a huge moment yesterday when it was a huge part of that was education. Obviously, you know what I mean? We were talking about real estate, right? I bring it home with me. So that's something that's huge. And so today, Bob Norton, he's a real estate specific CPA. Look, these meetings are free. Obviously, when we meet at a restaurant like this, we do ask, hey, if you order something, take care of your own tab as a thank you for us using their room. We do have a handful of main sponsors. These are what allow us to continue to do these meetings free, no charge. But these are people that we use often. So one of them is Florida Lee Law and Title. They're a closing company, a title company that you can do your closings through, create LLCs through, stuff like that. Then we've got Pelican Realty that does property management. They help you when you don't want to deal with the tenant part. Come on in, man. Find a seat. And the other one is Bob. Bob Morton. He's a real estate specific CPA. They also do accounting work. That was one of my favorite days in my career, was handing off all of my accounting to them. So with that being said, I'm going to have Bob come up and share about it. And then what we do, Bob's going to talk through a few things, but then it's going to be open for Q&A as well. Do you want them to ask questions throughout?
They can.
Sure. All right, let's go at it.
Short and informal. So, before you introduce me, so I don't get to this again. One of the things that I come across, almost everyone that comes to me that wants my help is also asking about how can they get funded. So one of the things that holds a lot of people back from getting started in real estate investing is a myth that you need to have funding before you go find a real estate deal. And it's actually not true, because if you find a good deal, you can find the funding. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to lend to you or to joint venture with you, like we'll discuss in a second, if you have a good deal. So the focus as a real estate investor should be on finding the deals, running the numbers, and understanding the opportunity that's there, and then you can figure out how to fund it. And knowing the different options for funding is what we're gonna talk about today. So there's two types of funding, there's YOM and OPM. YOM is your money, it's your own money, is that what it stands for, and then OPM is other people's money. A lot of people don't think about the fact that they can actually pay cash for stuff. They're always worried about how do I borrow it from the bank or something like that. But everyone prefers to borrow the money because there's leverage in there. There's higher rates of return. Here's an example. So if you purchase a $100,000 house with cash, and say it earns $10,000 a year in income, I'm doing this to make the math easy. If you find one of these, call me, I'll buy it. That's a cash on cash return of 10%. If you purchase the same house, you put 20% down, that's a cash on cash return of 50%. See how the percentage is going up. If you only have to put 5% down, that's a 200% return on your money. And if you can buy that house with zero down, your rate of return is infinite. So if you only have $1,000 for investing, how many houses can you buy at $0 down? That's what we're going to talk about today. So that's the creative financing side and how you get into a lot of stuff. And I look for those. I'm in fact meeting with someone tomorrow that we're basically working on a deal where I'm going to get into it with no money down. So if you come across any of those. All right, so here are the different ways you can fund things. I'm going to go into some details about them. So there's residential mortgages, which most people are really familiar with. Commercial mortgages, that's usually with a bank. There are some investors out there who do that. There's hard money lenders. There's private lenders. Joint venture partners. And then you can also get the sellers to finance the deals for you. And you can also get the buyers to finance the deals for you. And so that's a really creative aspect of it, but that's an option most people don't think about. So residential mortgages, these are really good for, and these also include home equity lines of credit, which we call HELOCs. So if you have equity in your home, you can go borrow, get a line of credit against that, and you can use that to fund your deals. So residential mortgages are really good for investors that have a W-2 job, that work for, they're not self-employed, they work for somebody else. Because the banks really love that, and for the residential loans in particular, really love to look at you have an income source other than your business or your investment, so that if that investment's not making any money, they know you can pay it back because you get money in. And this is where most people come to me, because the good thing about residential mortgages is you can usually get lower amounts down, and it has lower interest rates. But the reason those interest rates are so low is because they're really government-backed loans. And so they have the mile-long checklist of all the things you have to do. And that's where people have an issue. I have a lot of guys that come to me trying to get those loans, and the mortgage broker says, your income's too low. And so they come to me and saying, it's like, I don't want, because they want to show their tax return, I don't want to show all my expenses this year. So what they're telling me is they prefer to pay extra taxes just so they can get a slightly smaller interest rate on the loan. Paying taxes is against my religion. So
Says the CPA in the room.
So I don't like to do that. But if they have a target number they can hit, we can figure out how to do that. Because the IRS doesn't care if you don't claim all your deductions. They only care if you claim deductions you really don't have. So in fact, they prefer you to pay more tax anyway. Look at it. Commercial mortgages, those are where you usually through a bank. There's a commercial side, and those are buying income-producing properties is really what it is. But they really look at bigger properties. So a building like this that we're in now, the bank would look at that. Apartment complexes, anything larger. Residential mortgages you can get on homes that are single-family up to a fourplex, basically 4 units in the same building. Those are all considered residential.
And that's what you would live in, right?
And you can live in those, yes. And that's what a residential mortgage qualifies for. A commercial mortgage can also fund the same buildings. Their programs are slightly different, but if you're going for a residential mortgage, it's a 1 to 4plex. And then if you want to buy a building with 5 units, the residential guys will say, you can't do that. You got to go to a commercial guy. Now with commercial mortgages, the pluses of these is that you can probably get funded even if you're self-employed, because they're going to look at the property and the income producing ability of that property. The downside is they usually want you to put up more money, and they also have a slightly higher interest rate, and they also will have a loan that's basically renewable every 5 years. They'll let you amortize it, pay it as if you have a long-term mortgage, but every 5 years they renew it. They look at it to renew it, and they could decide no, and it's all due right then. There are a few companies out there, they're really backed by investor groups that are doing long-term commercial loans. They charge even higher rates and then more fees, but if the numbers work, they're still a viable option for that. And you can also get what are called business lines of credit. So if you have, well, after you start building your portfolio and you have several properties out there and it's built up equity over time because your tenants have been paying off the notes for you, you go to a commercial bank and saying, I want to get a line of credit across my portfolio, and they will write loans like that. So that gives you a bigger line of credit to pull against. Our money lenders are private individuals that it could be they have a company set up, but they're not a bank basically, and they charge higher interest rates, and they're called hard money lenders only because the money is expensive, not that it's hard to get. It's actually easy to get if you've got a really good deal, and the more experience you get under your belt, because they look at experience too. You know, if you're very experienced, it's almost a no-brainer for them, but they're going to charge you points up front, higher interest rates, points on the back end, and maybe even throw a bunch of extra fees in there. But the reason you use a hard money lender is because you can't get it from a bank, and you really only need the money for a short period of time before you can refinance it. So there's a financing method or a strategy, I guess, called the REIA method. I don't know if y'all heard about that, but it's BE followed by 4 R's, which stands for buy, rehab, rent, refi, and repeat. And so the idea is you get in with a hard money lender, so you buy it with a hard money loan. You can use any kind of line of credit or whatever, private lender or anything, but you get in with that, and then you fix up the property, you get a tenant in there. Now it's an income producing property. You go to a commercial bank, show them the numbers, and then they fund it for you. And if you bought it right and your rehab costs didn't go too far over budget, you might be able to get all the money back out and pay off the hard money lender and any money you had to put down. And now you have $0 in that deal, and you're getting an infinite rate of return on your rents. So that's an option. That's what a lot of we use hard money lenders for. Private lenders are private individuals that have cash that are interested in making a higher rate of return on the money than they can get at the bank or the stock market. These also might be individuals that have money in a 401k or an IRA. They can roll that out into what's called a self-directed 401k or IRA. So get a self-directed 401k, they have to have a business. But they can always set up a business to create one. There's always, whatever the rules are, we can figure out a way around the rules. You just got to do creative thinking on that. But these individuals have money that they want to invest. And then the beauty of investing from their standpoint inside a self-directed IRA is that the earnings that they get from that, the interest, they're not paying tax on it. If they have a Roth, they will never pay tax on it. If it's a traditional IRA, well, they'll pay tax when they have to start pulling it out of retirement. But it could be people that have money sitting in a CD or money in a money market. They're paying dismal rates of interest. You can pay them a few more points above that, and they may like it. You can pay them as a hard money lender, however you want to do it. And the thing, if you work with a private lender, one thing to caution is that you want to sort of protect them, because you want to make sure that they get all their principal back and they get some interest back. So you don't want to put them into something too risky. So that means that you want to, when I use a private lender, I usually give them a first mortgage. I file a mortgage on the property with their promissory note. The same thing as I would with a bank. I treat them just like a bank. I get title insurance. I get insurance. They get named as additional insured. I do everything that I would need to do with a bank, but I do that to protect my private lender. Because if something happens to burns down, right, after I finish rehabbing it, or a tenant burns it down, then I want to make sure they get all their principal back. And then, so that they'll work with me again, number one. But then, you know, sometimes they may be putting in part of their life savings, and you want to make sure they get that back. So JV partners are really other real estate investors that have money or experience that you need to get your deal done. And then what they'll do is they'll come in and they may be more of an investor in the project as opposed to a lender. And y'all create an LLC together, and then you buy a property, fix it up, do whatever you need to do. They could also be lenders because they can decide, well, I'm going to put money in, and they know that if you flip the property, you get to the end, and when you go to close and sell it, they get their payment plus whatever interest that you agree or their portion. A lot of times with JV partners, they're at risk with you in the sense that they're willing to take a portion of the deal, the profit that you make. And so they have what's essentially a variable interest rate. It's based on what they get at the end. They get their principal back, plus they split the profits with you. And then, you know, sometimes you may have some money, you may have funding, but you come across a really complex deal and you need some expertise or someone to help you, and some JV partners will step in and they'll do that, and they'll get a portion of the deal, but you're using their brain capacity as opposed to actual money to do that. That happens quite a bit, actually. Now, sellers, there's several ways to look at that. So, you know, if a seller has a house free and clear, then instead of you paying them cash for the house, you can just pay them in payments over a period of time. Anything you can work out with them. Because it's just the two of you negotiating, however you can do that. Now, right now in the market, if they're a seller and they own the home, they've lived in it for at least 2 years, if they receive cash for it, they're going to get a tax-free gain on it. It's an exclusion of the tax code for some personal residence. So there's really no incentive for them, those individuals, to defer paying tax on it because they're not going to owe you tax. But if you come across a landlord that owns a property free and clear, and they're retiring, they want to sell it, whatever it might be, they're going to have a tax problem when they sell it, because it's going to be a big capital gains tax. They will be more likely willing to sell with payments.
Another part to that part is, like, for example, at 2 o'clock today, I have a conference call with a seller who inherited a property. If you follow me on Instagram, this is the hoarder house that I posted like the other day. Literally, we had to like shove the door in so we could get in, and it's like a dump truck dumped trash in the living room, right? But they inherited, that's Grandma and Grandpa's house. They inherited it. Their offers they've been getting have been real low because there's a lot of work that has to be done, right? Some of the trees coming through the roof, stuff like that. So cash-wise, my offer is like 18,000. The house needs over 80, like 80 in work, and it's only worth like 165, right? So I said, hey, this is what it'll look like. But I said, but if you let me make payments, I can pay you 30 grand. I'm able to make, so for them, it's not a tax incentive because there's a big tax bill, but for them, that's going to be an expense. My money is not coming out of my pocket. It's coming from other people. I use private lenders, things like that. So instead of it being, having the expense of interest that I'm paying to someone else, instead, I just offer the seller, I equal it out that way. So then I don't have to go in necessarily find the money, right? Because I utilize the sellers that are in place. Just a thought. Obviously, they can't fund the rehab, so that money has to come from somewhere, generally speaking.
That's not, there's people that have a house that they want to sell, and it's a method of working out a deal with them so you can get it without putting as much money down.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Does it matter what instrument, like if you use a mortgage or a bond for deed, when it comes to their tax benefits? Like for selling?
No, the IRS treats those as the same.
So like a seller financing and an installment sale and like a bond,
Yeah, they
contract for deed,
as
bond
an
for deed.
installment sale. So what a bond for deed is in a contract for deed outside of Louisiana, is where you buy the house, you make payments, but the title doesn't transfer until you complete the bond, which is you complete all those payments. Whereas if you buy a property with a mortgage on it, title transfers, you now have a note that's attached with the mortgage, and if you don't pay off that mortgage, then the mortgage holder can foreclose and take away the house. If you have a bond for deed, the bond holder can, so a lot of people that sell on owner financing might prefer to use a bond for deed, so that would be an option, because that's one of the next things I was going to talk about. The other thing as well is there's also what's called subject to, and this isn't really seller financing, but it sort of falls in that realm. Subject to is where you take over their paying, take over the note that they already have, their mortgage. So if someone has a house for sale that's say it's worth maybe $150,000, but they owe $160,000 on it, they're upside down, so they'd have to come to the closing and write a check. But you could buy that house from them, assuming that it cash flows if you put a tenant in there. You could buy that house from them even though it's upside down, because that's a temporary thing based on the market, as opposed to a permanent reduction in value. But also, if it needs a lot of repairs for them to get it market ready to sell, and they just need to get out from underneath the note, there's a lot of reasons why someone would be willing to sell with subject to. You just have to get to know the secret in the game is really to build a relationship with the seller, find out what their problem is. Courtney likes to say they don't like, she's looking for a problem, and then you find the problem and you fix the problem for that person. The house comes with it. You get the house, they get freedom from the problem. Now the other way to fund a deal is using buyers. And an example like that, so I'm working a deal right now that it's a subject to deal, but I'm getting it through a wholesaler. So the wholesaler wants a fee on top of the deal. The guy's willing to walk away from the house. It needs some repairs, and the numbers are fairly thin as far as, you know, making the numbers work. But we're going to lease option it, and we're going to find we're pretty certain we have a couple of candidates. We're going to lease option it. We're going to get the tenant buyer to make a down payment, which is going to cover the wholesale payment to the wholesaler, and then they're going to agree to fix up the property. Hopefully we can work that out. And if it does, and we bought the house subject to, we'll lease it to them until they can pay off the house, and then we'll pay off that note, and then we'll walk away with a little bit of cash that we're getting into it with almost nothing down. If that doesn't work, I'm going to be out of pocket a bunch of money, and I'm going to fix it up, and then we're going to just rent it. But hey, there's risk in this stuff. We got to keep, we keep trying. Going back to something, so on commercial mortgages, I mentioned, cash flowing properties are really easy to get commercial loans. With hard money lenders, those are guys where you can get a really deep discount on a property. So you need cash really quickly, because those guys usually turn it really fast. You go to a bank, it'll be several weeks before you're going to get a loan. But with a hard money lender, they can do it in several days. Some of them, the bigger ones, tend to work just like a bank, so it's done. But you can get, but to make hard money work, you've got to get a big discount. You've got to be able to turn that property really fast. Private lenders, you can use that anytime you want, because it's basically your agreement with them. So what a lot of people come up to me and ask me, how do I get a loan from a bank? What do I need to do? And that kind of stuff. And I said, why are you using banks? And they just give me this blank stare. What are you talking about? They only think banks are the only place to go. I was like, no. You need to cultivate private lenders. And you need to start looking for deals, and you need to start talking about your deals, and you're going to find the private lenders, because there's people that that are interested in real estate, they don't have the time for it, and they want to make a higher rate of return. So they're going to volunteer that, hey, I could maybe help out, I've got someone in savings, that kind of stuff. So you really don't have to solicit people. Every person you meet, I'm looking for private lenders. It doesn't really work that way. But you tell people about your deals, and they're going to reveal that they're going to be interested in learning more. There's a really good book on raising private capital, I think is the name of it.
And the bigger pocket. That's the bigger pockets book.
There's one of the bigger pockets books, and it talks about the process. It talks about the whole thing. So that's a really good book to read. I've had people come up to me. I've been at the REIA meetings on Tuesdays, and have people come up to me and say they're having a hard time getting financing, all this, and we talk about private lenders. and they're saying, yeah, but I just don't know any private lenders. And I can't just turn around and just start pointing out the guys in the room that we fund the deals. You know, I know that stuff, but I was basically saying, well, you just need to get to know some people here, tell them about your deals, network, that's what the purpose of the meeting's for, and eventually you're going to find partners that will help you. Joint venture partners, just other real estate investors, you get to know them by, and that works on any deal as well. You get to know them by networking at the REIA meetings. You know, Courtney always says, you know, hey, if you have a problem, give me a call. Usually that's where it starts. How do I do this? She may know somebody that's looking to do a deal like that, or that has expertise that may be able to help for part of the deal. She may be able to help for part of the deal. And then really any other investor out there could do that. So, you know, that's always a good thing to do. The downside of a joint venture partner is you're giving away a portion of the deal. But it's better to get 50% of something than 0% of something. So, and part of that, when you're giving away that, it's an educational expense. You can look at it because you're doing something probably more complicated than you can handle, but you're going to learn a lot. Of course, sales with owner financing. It turns out more sellers are willing to do that than you would think. So it's just a matter of you have to ask. And like Courtney's just gave us an example. It's like she gave them two options. So like, here's two ways I can buy. I can pay cash at this, or if we can do payment options, you usually don't say owner finance. You just say, if I can make payments, I can pay you more because it gives me time to get that payment made. Same thing with subject to. I talked to so many people saying, why would anyone sell something subject to? It's basically what subject to is. I don't know if we talked about this. So subject to is where you take over the note, but the note actually stays in the seller's name. So they're on the hook if you don't make those payments. They're going to be sued for that, and they've transferred the house to you. And you would think, why would anyone want to do that? Well, you never know. Usually it's a problem house to them, or they have some other financial issues, and it's just like, that's the least of their worries. But you have to offer that and find out. They might be willing to do that.
Excuse me,
yes.
sorry, quick question, sir. In the midst of doing a subject to, I know that there's a clause in the mortgage statement that says that at any moment, the lender could call the note due.
Yes.
Is there a way around that if that process happens? Like, you know,
Yeah. Well, you just ignore it. It's not a law. It's an agreement. It turns out it depends on the bank.
Okay.
But it turns out there's a lot of guys that do a lot of finagling stuff. They try to set up a trust. They try to do an LLC. They do all this stuff. I've seen so many people come to me and they're doing all this stuff when you're spending so much time and effort trying to hide the fact that they transfer title. And it turns out as long as you're making the payments, it doesn't count.
Generally speaking, so I've done subject to deals. If any of you guys want to learn more, if you go to Courtney10k.com, that was the main teaching this month, was on subject to. I bought my primary residence subject to the existing mortgage earlier this year. I don't hide it. When I pitch subject to, I address the due on sale clause, all those things, but I also don't make promises like, hey, if that happens, I'm not going to go run to the bank and get a new loan. We're going to work through it. I've never had any of mine called due. The only person who I personally know who's had one called is my friend Pat, and it was from the smallest bank on the coast. Like, they had literally 3 branches, and the disgruntled wife, ex-wife, walked in one day and had just gotten in a fight with the husband, ex-husband, and said, well, he sold y'all's house and didn't pay y'all that mortgage. And so then the woman's like, you know, the cashier's like, that doesn't sound right, and goes in. The president calls Pat, he runs the REIA on the Gulf Coast, and said, you know, hey, I see that you're the new owner. And he said, look, first of all, he said, we're renovating this property. It was in disrepair. We're renovating this property right now. If you would like, we have been making payments. We can stop. And he said, no, don't do that. But they were actually just about to sell it. So they bought it subject to then flip it, right? And he said, look, I'm gearing up. Like, we have it, you know, like we have it on trajectory to sell. You make the call. Do you want me to stop making payments and we go this route? We then find a different solution, or do you want me to keep making payments on a property that was not current on the loan before, you know, stuff like that. So many people make it a big deal. I'm not gonna run from it. I definitely disclose it. I don't hide it from the sellers. I discuss it. But it's one of those things. That due on sale clause, for example, he's talking about a bond for deed, or if you buy a property, through creative means, and if there's an existing loan on the property at all, the clause says that they shall be able to call it due. Doesn't mean they have to. They just have the option to. And a lot of them, they don't want to say, no, you're paying, please stop. Or, you know what I mean? And so they don't have a due on sale clause department. And so a lot of times it's the rare occasion that someone picks up on it and does it. And then at that point, then it becomes a discussion with the bank. And I really have only ever seen it be an issue for those real small banks. And at that point, I would have no problem going and sitting in the office of that the president, whoever might be higher up, and talk through some options with them. I'm like, hey, look, I can go refinance you out. Or would you rather these payments still getting paid to your bank? Or, I can pull this loan from you guys. I'll go, and this is also why you want to buy, especially subject to or any creative deals with equity. Because if you don't have equity, you don't have any options to go refinance it, right? You're then just sitting there. You don't have those options. So that's one of those things you just want to be mindful of and careful with.
Yeah, you want to do your paperwork. So we already had a good class. It's on the web. And then, Justin Allen, who a year ago or so.
Yeah, there's 2 more trainings on it.
2 other trainings. He came, and I don't know if his little checklist is still available on the website or not.
No, because it was like from a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now at this point.
He gave a little checklist of stuff that he does.
Yeah.
And with documents and stuff. So that was really good. Some of the key things to remember about subject to is that most of the mortgages get sold. So it's a servicing company that's actually handling that stuff. Like Courtney said, there's no due on sale department in there. Banks aren't looking back in these titles. They don't even care. They got the mortgage files. They're not so there's as long as you're making a payment, you're not even on anyone's radar. So a lot of times you may have to catch up payments on mortgages to take them over subject to. That happens a lot. It's one of the reasons why they're going to give it to you subject to is they're behind and can't afford anymore. One of the spouses or both spouses lost their job, and now they're trying to figure out what they need to do. So the other thing to consider is that from a bank standpoint, because they've sold, when a bank sells a mortgage, so usually when you get a mortgage, a residential mortgage, it gets sold almost immediately. It's not like the same day.
So my significant other bought that house yesterday, their first house. It was through Hancock Whitney. At the closing yesterday morning, buying the house, they also said, hi, Hancock Whitney is no longer your lender. Like, they had already sold it before she even bought the house.
So the mortgages get sold a lot. And so what happens is, when they decide that the when the note is no longer collectible, then it rolls all the way back through the system to the originator of the loan. And so that will happen in some cases. The other cases that they have to go and file with the IRS, but with us to get reimbursed for that. That's what the PMI is. But the other thing that happens to them is that bank has to move it from an asset column to a liability column. And then when they do that, the Fed reduces how much money they can borrow from them. And maybe even adjust the rate. So the last thing a bank wants to do is ever put a loan in the non-performing category. So they're going to call and threaten, but they won't do that. And as long as you're making the payments, you're not even going to worry about it.
So in my mind, it's the start of a negotiation. If I ever got one of those, it'd be the start of a negotiation. They might not see it that way, but that's how I see it. And again, I've done it. I've never got one of those. Of all my friends who've done numerous of them, I only know one person. Again, really small bank type of thing. So a lot of people put a lot more emphasis, again, as a roadblock where education can help you overcome that. And options. Equity can help with options.
Right, and then going back to the bond for deed question. So when in bond for deeds, the title doesn't change, it's hands, right? It stays in the seller's name. So if the person's not willing to do a substitute loan, but they're willing to take payments, you could do it bond for deed and buy the property. And then the title hasn't changed. It's not going to kick off the due on sale clause. And then when you pay off the bond, you'll refinance it at some point later. you'll cash out that note and then have another note and then they're gonna pay off. So that is a way some investors get around the dual sale clause. I don't like buying with bond for deeds because I don't have the title on my name. This is just a simple, there could be a snafu, something, things that doesn't show up and then you get evicted, basically for that, and it's like all the money you put into it, it's now loaned back to the seller. Another way you can sell to buyers or a fun thing, this is a short thing. If you're doing wholesaling, there's also a term called wholesaling, which is wholesale and retailing at the same time. Retailing is where you sell to the consumer buyer. Well, wholesalers get a contract on the house and can work with the seller in some cases to fix up the house and make it ready. Usually what they do is you just clean it really good, they can paint it, you can put minimum stuff in there and then sell it to a consumer. Get it to the point where the bank would lend on it, because the bank's not going to lend on a run down the house. But
To interrupt
You looking for
I think
someone?
having an auction off food, I'm just really confused right now. Is somebody missing a grilled chicken Caesar salad? Okay.
Black, and I don't know.
Oh, it's good. Kind of look the same.
See, what the people who on the recording are missing is the good, delicious food, right?
Thank you. I'm sorry.
so with hoteling, you can get a property under contract, clean it up really good, and then you can turn around and sell it to a buyer, and then that buyer then buys the property from you, you pay off the seller, and then you get paid a markup. And then that's basically hoteling. Some guys also may buy that property from the seller, turn around and fix it up for me and sell it, in which case you would be out some money, but hopefully it's a quick turnaround. You could also use a private lender or a joint venture partner or something like that. The only thing you have to be aware of is that if you do a deal and the seller, you haven't bought the property and you turn around and sell it, you've got to have agreements with the seller to do that. You may not be able to list that in MLS because a lot of realtors are going to have an issue with that because they only want to deal with the seller. But it's still an option out there, and there's a lot of creative things you can do there. So that's really most of the basics, and I'm going to open it up for questions and to figure out exactly what you guys want to learn more about.
Hugh has a question here for Bob, as far as any of the things that he went over.
Can you talk a little bit about depreciation recapture when you sell a property that you own, not your personal residence, but?
Sure. So when you own a property, a rental property, you're going to depreciate that to offset some of the cash flow so you can lower your taxes. Well, when you sell a property, you have to, whatever you've depreciated, you have to, what depreciation does on a tax standpoint is it lowers your investment value in the building, because you're basically writing off part of the building. So then say that this $100,000 house that we were using earlier, say that you've owned it for like 5 years and you've depreciated it, and about $20,000 of depreciation against the house. So if you sell a house for $150,000, you made, from your original purchase of $100,000, you made a $50,000 long-term gain. But you've also got additional $20,000 worth of gain coming from depreciation. That's called depreciation recapture. And the reason it's treated separately is because you wrote off that depreciation against your regular income tax rate. The IRS wants to get your regular income tax rate back for that. So if you tax at a higher rate, you still get a break in the sense that if you're in the highest tax bracket, depreciation recapture is capped at 25% of the value. So if you're in the highest tax bracket, which is around 37%, you could still be paying less on depreciation recapture than you would if it was ordinary income. But if you're in the 22% tax bracket, you're going to be paying 22% on that, not the 25%, because it's the lower of your tax bracket, or 25%. And so if you can imagine someone that's owned an apartment complex or several buildings and they've owned it for a very long time, and significantly depreciated that, when they go to sell it, they have a really hefty tax bill.
To give you an idea, I walked a fourplex last night in the city. They bought it in 2006 for $135. The asking price was $849 yesterday. From 2006 to today, right? So they own multiple properties. After post-Katrina, they weren't buying it, right? And so, no, don't get me wrong, they put work into these, so there's, there's some other things that goes on into the picture here. But at the end of the day, one of the biggest things I've said, and this has actually been a huge part for me to be able to get creative deals. As a creative real estate investor, I use this a lot to where that is a part of the problem. Remember how I get great deals by solving problems? One of the big problems is people who are selling not properties they live in, but like investment properties. If they've owned them for any more than like say 5 years, my ears are perked up. And I'm saying, look, have you talked to a CPA? I bought a house inside Ellen Lake Village. ARV 250, 225, 250, size house. I grew up in that neighborhood. I was doing a project, and they said, hey, go talk to, this owner over here. Yeah. And so I'm talking to the woman. They lived there in the 80s, grew out of the house, so they bought another one, but then they kept it all these years since the 80s as a rental, right? That's one of the things he talked about. The house we used to live in, they got a great loan on it. They kept that loan and just turned it into a rental. Well, she goes to sell it to me. I said, look, you've owned it for a long time. Please go talk to your CPA because Uncle Sam's going to put his hand out for a big chunk. She assured me she went and talked. I ran into her in Rouse's or Winn-Dixie 6 to 9 months after the transaction. She said, Courtney, you would never believe how much, she even sold it to me at a discount, how much I had to pay Uncle Sam. For $20,000 to $30,000. It salvaged the sale for me. So one of the things that I've done, especially if someone's selling, so I've bought portfolios from people before, so they're rental portfolios. It's even a bigger deal when it's either larger deals or it's like a commercial deals or stuff like that, or it's a portfolio. I say, hey, look, as a part of my offer, I will maybe pay Bob his hourly rate for them to go and consult with him outside of me, just so they understand the ramifications. So a lot of that time, instead of them paying all those taxes, so let's just say it's the $30,000, right? Let's just go back to the single family home. So instead of her paying $30,000 to Uncle Sam today, when she gets that check from me at closing, it being due in that year, what we can do is, hey, let me make it to you on payments. And then what they would do is it would be over time, they would have smaller chunks. I would much rather pay a bill in smaller chunks over time than have to pay a one-time $30,000 check, right? Because then what can you do? You can use your income from those multiple years to pay that off versus having to, use all that money, right? Because you guys understand what I'm saying here? So a lot of times, when I can diagnose that, help them diagnose the problem, then we can prescribe an option for them to look at, to explore. And some of them, they say, yeah, I like that. Right? Because some of them, they're religiously not wanting to pay Uncle Sam. So we can also, too, explore some options like that. That's when you have to get very creative, and I will absolutely hire him if they're very much willing and on board, right? But at the same time, most of them don't fully consider that problem, right? Here's the other thing, is they need to have someone, a good person in their corner who understands it. I fired 5 people. I joke about this often. I fired 5 CPAs before I found Bob years ago, right? One of them was myself. TurboTax. And so keep that in mind. You had a question?
I do. So when it comes into play of 1031 exchange, how does that work with the...
So when you do a 1031 exchange, you're trading one property for another.
Right.
So
You're just deferring what's the amount.
So that
$30,000 bill,
Yeah. It's just being deferred.
It's pushed down the road. So you're
that
not
bill
paying
gets tied to the
taxes.
next property.
Yeah.
But most people don't want, a lot of times they're want to escape the actual owning the property, or, because they also don't get the money, right? So if you put all that money into the next property, so a lot of times too, they don't want that.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
they're
into
the road, they're right in retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, the joke here is I've helped a lot of people buy their first property and their next through these meetings over the years. I've also helped a lot of people stop doing deals by buying their portfolio at the end of their career. But this is a very real reality for me getting funding for my deals. You see what I'm saying?
So with a 1031 exchange, if you walk away from when you sell the property or you buy the property, replacement property, with any cash, you're paying tax on it. Because if Dire Street's any cash you receive as taxable income first. And then they don't prorate it based on the value. I had one client years ago who sold a house, 1031 exchange. She needed $50,000 out of it. Well, her gain on the house was $52,000. So it's like you deferred $2,000 in gain, then you got taxed on the whole 50. That, and it probably costs you more in tax to save on that $2,000 to do the 1031 exchange. So you always want to do the calculation first. So many people are afraid of paying tax. They don't realize sometimes how little the tax really is.
You need to get that number amount. So I just sold a property on last Friday. A big part of me, anytime you sell, or anytime you're buying from someone and they're selling, they need to understand the tax consequence. Because again, that can motivate, you know, whether they sell it to you creatively, or that should motivate what you do with the cash, right? So I just sold one, and before I sold it, so before the closing is finalized, you need to have whatever your plan is finalized. Too many people say, hey, I sold a house last Friday. Hey, Bob, I want to do a 1031 exchange. She's too late. Sadly, it is. Any questions?
You could do a 1031, what's the tax consequence if you, the property you buy, with the 1031 exchange that you went into, the higher priced property, and you're gonna leave it to your heirs? What, does anything change in the tax consequence there?
I love your thinking here. Go ahead.
Yes, so if you have rental properties and you keep 1031 in them, right? And then you pass away and you leave that to your heirs, they get a step up in basis that wipes out all those gains. They won't pay tax on it.
At the fair market value when
This is how the rich are wealthy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they structure things so that that's how they pass on all the stuff.
It's also what the government wants to get taken out of the 1031 exchange part. They want to remove that step of basis, right?
So there's really no reason to put it in a trust if your estate is already, your estate plans are already such that that property goes to those heirs.
There's other reasons for trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the probate process, there's other benefits to trust.
Yeah, trust isn't going to save you taxes necessarily. So a trust is really for,
Asset protection.
no, trust, you don't have too much. They have one little small aspect of asset protection, but for the most part, they don't. They can still be sued just like anyone else, and they can lose everything that's in the trust. So, but what they do is just for estate planning purposes, on transferring stuff to heirs without going to probate and all that stuff, because it's an instant transfer for the most part when it's in a trust. It's just like the trustee just a beneficiary. One day it's this person, the next day it's this person. So I don't know if you remember when Michael Jackson passed away. It was all in the media, all this stuff. Like we can't wait to find out, you know, what's going to happen with all this stuff. And all of a sudden, you didn't hear anything about it because they found the trust. He had set up a trust, and like no one knows what happened to his estate because it was in a trust. So, so that's the power of trust.
So let's look through a few things. Okay, so first of all, residential mortgages. I think this is often the best way for people to get into investing is using the home that you live in. Whether it is, you have the one in Woodwood. Can you share about that? That you have a rental?
Right. So, well, that one's.
You lived in it.
I lived in it for years. I bought it, and I remember my wife Cindy was like, when we bought the house, I said this is going to make a great rental. I just didn't plan on living in it for 25 years. But, and then we finally decided to, okay, we're going to go buy another house. We kept that one. It's a great rental. But the notes that's on there is a low interest loan, and we have plenty of equity in the house, and the tenant's paying off the loan for it. So, but I didn't have to do anything with it other than I moved, and then the notes, you know, the notes say my name. We've actually moved it into an LLC, so we put claimed it into an LLC, except the note is still in my name because I didn't refinance it. To get it in an LLC, we have to refinance it. But I didn't know about this.
Cole, do you mind sharing your story, how you house hacked?
Yeah, in Hammond, I bought a single-family house with a FHA loan, and I just rented out the rooms, and that...
So a 3-bedroom house?
Yeah, 3-bedroom house. I lived in the master bedroom and rented out the bedrooms, and it covered the mortgage, and there was actually some cash flow.
So you was making money while living in that, right? And renting out the rooms. Now, some people say, Courtney, I'm not, I don't want to do that. Okay, so what are you doing now?
So a year after that, I bought 2 houses on one lot with the same low down. This was a conventional loan though, and then rent out the larger house and live in the smaller house. So now there's no roommates, but I still have the first property that I rent out by the room.
So you just rented that third room back out. So, one of the things, Cole, you started coming here right before your 18th birthday.
Yeah.
And Cole is in his early 20s, and he has 3 properties, using a very traditional method, but he's doing it with a very investment-minded, like, reality. Those residential loans, so sometimes they have the 1 year. So I remember you had the first one that you bought, you had that 1 year. It had to be owner occupied.
Yeah, that you have to live there. The second one doesn't have that. But FHA, you have to live there for the year.
So FHA is 3.5% down, right? You might be able to find a rural development loan where it's 0% down. For example, my significant other bought the house yesterday. They bought one. Hancock Whitney had this program. It was a minority census tract type program. Basically, they bought a property in New Orleans where the census showed that the majority of the area had minorities. It was some type of program like that. 0% down, no PMI. PMI is like $100 a month a lot of times for like what, the life loan? I don't know. I don't deal with bank loans. Depends on the loan. And so they had like no income limits with it, anything like that. They bought a $324,000 house, 4-year-old new construction house in Broadmoor. They got it, and so they could do 0% down, but they actually had money saved, so they did 5% down to kind of get the loan lower. They got 4.25% interest rate yesterday, right, on this house. And so but there's programs. Jefferson Parish just came out with a program for a first-time homebuyer grant, right? I believe if you're buying in Kenner, I think it's up to 60 grand. I think the rest of JG is 40 grand. So like that's education, right? Like understanding what these different products are out there could help you. And so many people, fun fact, I read somewhere in the fine line, the fine print is a first-time homebuyer is someone who hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So whatever that looks like. So here's the thing. So there's that. There's also the concept of house hacking. Anyone here ever bought a double and lived in one side and rented out the other side? Same concept. He did it with single families or 2 separates. That's very common. New Orleans is a city of duplexes, right? Doubles, triplexes, quads. The Northshore, there's just less of them, right? So it's not as easy. Cole was looking forever for a double, but then he eventually found 2 houses on the same tax bill, and he eventually went that route, right? But guys, you don't understand. There's a huge value in that low, and like commercial loans are going to have a higher interest rate. So that 4.25%, you cannot touch that on a commercial, an investment-only property, right? It's going to be in the 5s, 6s, 7s, maybe even 8s right now. So there's value in that, right? Look, Cole told me he's not going to do anything for a year when he had those roommates, right? I mean, so this is huge. So the commercial one. So Bob, these are often, what percent down would you say the commercial ones that you've seen?
So commercial is usually, the banks usually ask for 30% down, but they really range from like 20 to 30%. So it depends on the size of the project, the cash flow of the project. But usually you can plan on putting maybe 25% down on a typical one. If you've been doing business with that bank before and you have several projects, you can probably go 20% down. But you're still looking at that. They want you to have some money in the game. And then the problem is like, we're buying properties that have an ARV of 200, but right now we're paying 100,000 for it. They're not going to give you, they're not going to base their loan on the ARV. They're going to base the loan on what you buy for it. So you're going to put $20,000 down, and then they're only going to loan you $80,000, but you need money to fix up the house. So, and commercial loans also do include construction loans. Construction loans, if you're going to go to a bank and get that, you can't get a residential loan to do construction. A construction loan is essentially a line of credit that grows. I mean, it's set with a top value of what you're going to need, but it grows as you build the house, and then they have to prove that. You get draws towards that to pay your contractors, and then when the house is completed, usually there's a provision that loan is rolled into a permanent loan, which is really a 5-year loan for commercial loan. But that is a commercial loan type that you could also use to build.
So Gulf Coast Bank, I personally haven't used this, but I have some good friends who are flippers who use it. They do these purchase renovation loans. So there's a purchase and renovation product. I know Gulf Coast Bank has one. I believe Resource might have one as well. Don't quote me on that, but look into it. At any given point, they may have these products and they may pull them back, things like that. A lot of times with them, they may say, hey, we need that 20%, but maybe just have it in a bank account with us. And then after a certain point when you're doing the renovations, after a while, we may release it or something like that. So understand these different parts. I had friends who would buy from the auction, and they would buy from so the auctions can demand 100% payment within 30 days, right? And so you need to be able to have your financing often is, the deal may determine what you can use, right? So keep those things in mind. So when we're talking about when I did my very first deal, I did with cash from the inheritance, okay? So this was money, it wasn't a lot, y'all, it was like 40 grand. It was not a lot, but it was something. But I owned that property free and clear at that point. And I had lived in it, it was a live-in flip. So I got a home equity line of credit, that HELOC, right? And so that property appraised for like 70-something thousand. So they gave me, I found the person who had the best product at the time. I think Hancock Whitney, so Whitney and Iberia had the two best home equity line of credit options. And they were willing to go up to 80% on a condo. And so it was a condo. And so I got a $60,000 line of credit. I did my first 3 deals after that with that line of credit. That was when I had my W-2 job, right? So I had locked that home equity line of credit in before I left my job. Because when I was leaving my job, I said, this is going away. Okay. So let's talk about this. Hard money lenders, you use them. Talk to me about your experience with them. What's been the fastest? You mentioned some of the pros and cons. Sometimes they're slow. I had someone buying a deal for me recently with a hard money lender, and it was going to be 45 days. So not all hard money lenders are very fast. Some of the best deals I've gotten was because I could buy fast, right?
Right. So the one that I use is they're a hard money lender. They also do long-term commercial loans. So I have a 30-year fixed rate loan on a rental property, that I won't have to worry about renewing every 5 years. I started that process probably at sometime before Thanksgiving last year, and we closed middle of January. And so, oh my God, well, the holidays slowed down, plus there was a resurgence of COVID, I think, pop up or something. But it was, when it came to getting a loan though, it was the easiest loan I've ever gotten in my life. Because they checked my credit score, found out that yes, I pay my bills. But then they asked me for any of my income. And, but they wanted to see the income from the property, because I was a rental I had a private lender on it. So I had no money in this. Well, I guess I put some money in, but by the time that I got to this point, the tenant had actually paid me back for everything I had put in. So, so I wanted to refinance out.
Did they have any money in the bank as far as like reserves or anything like that?
Well, that's the funny thing. So they wanted the last bank statements, and I set up an LLC for this, and we had it, and I sent that to them.
So it's first equity funding. If you go to Courtney10k.com, usually at the main meeting we have a whole bunch of cards out. So Ryan Camesso with First Equity Funding. Yeah, I know the deal you're talking about, so I'm like going through my head. First Equity Funding, they have 2 things: the fix and flip loan, but they also have the DSCR, or the asset-based lending for those 30-year fix. You can buy it in an LLC. And so Ryan Camesso with First Equity Funding, Courtney10k.com. If you see where it says preferred vendors, it actually has his website, email, and his cell phone number and all that. Ryan Camesso.
So my issue right now, I'm sorry. I went from a W-2, now I'm a general real estate agent, going to a 1099, right? So I can't do traditional financing right now, but I still have the bulk of equity. There's a lot that I can do. We have a couple rentals, so it's just I need, another option.
Sure. So
that would be good, because I'm in the same boat as everybody else. Like if I get a regular residential loan, they're going to want to look at all my stuff. I just have to be really, I have to be really good at showing low income. Yeah. So, they're going to look at it, what? Yeah, right. So I'm writing off everything I possibly can.
So hard money, first of all, if you're doing them for flips, let me say because I do not use hard money, me personally. I know many people who do. Here's one of my biggest fears, people who get into them whenever they're doing flips and they have, literally it's either a 6-month term or less than 12. I had a phone call yesterday with 2 different people who had, their time was coming up and their property, because the market's been cooling, is not selling as fast. So they're freaking the heck out right now, right? So one of those things is, that's very, hard money can be very expensive.
Do they in particular have an option where if you're doing the short term, that you'd be able to refinance into the longer term?
So not all hard money lenders offer the long term. So first of all, right, some of them just only like the short term stuff. Depends what they have the products and appetite for. First Equity has that second option where they actually, but you're going to pay some closing, like the loan, more fees and stuff like that.
Almost if you do a flip and you're like,
Oh, let me turn it into a rental. Yeah, and then the numbers need to work, right? Because not everyone sets, that's why you need to have more options with your exit strategies whenever you underwrite a deal, because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people who thought they were flipping that might be like, well, I'm now a landlord. So, hard money, here's a few things with hard money. Hard money is going to be more expensive. Here's the thing is, don't get caught up in interest rates though. If you guys have heard, we had the Burr method that was talked about. He was just talking about it earlier. If you go watch on the YouTube channel, we had Sterling Chapman come and share. Any of you guys there for that one? Sterling Chapman runs the REIA up in Baton Rouge. Sterling got started in the beginning of 2018. Last time I checked, he now owns over 80 single-family or small doubles in the Baton Rouge area. And he has a full-time job. I asked him the other week, I said, bro, when are you, we were talking, I said, bro, when are you going to quit that job? He's like, if I wasn't so ambitious, I would have already quit. But he's like, he's kind of been going broke and buying a lot of cheap houses, right? But the reality is he does the Burr method. He uses either private money or hard money, gets into the loan, and then does that cash out refi. A lot of times with that asset-based lender, like we're talking about with First Equity funding, right? Here's the thing though, with his private money lenders, he was saying, and a lot of people's hairs stood on the back of their neck, because he was saying, hey, I'll pay them 20%, give me $100,000 for a year, and I'll return you 120. Well, but here's the reality though, he has deal flow. For him, he's not paying 20% on one deal, he might use that money for 2 or 3 deals, and it's less, right? Most people don't have a deal flow for that, but he's hustling in every which way. But the reality here, so many people they're freaking out. I was at an event last night talking about, is the market crashing? And a lot of people were saying like, oh, at 5 and 6%. Do you guys know the average rate in 2019 was 5 and 6%? We just been spoiled, and humanity by nature have short memories, right? So keep those things in mind. Don't freak out. Build that interest rate as an expense. But understand that the deal needs to be able to support it. Don't go pay 20% if the deal can't support it. That's how people get in trouble, and my phone starts ringing off the hook, being like, I don't know what to do. I have had to sadly see some investors go through foreclosure because they didn't plan ahead, right? But hard money, there's a lot of hard money lenders who are like, oh, we have private money. It's a new thing, and I actually have, I don't know the word, maybe it's been contentious. When I tell people, I'm like, well, I call that soft money. It's still higher interest rates and things like that, but it's still institutionally backed, either by a fund or like a big investment group. And the difference I talk about is, do they have a business card that says I lend money? When I say I use private money lenders, I'm saying, hey, these are everyday individuals who, I kid you not, so I don't use bank loans. So ever since those 3 home equity line of credits, I haven't used the bank. Now I have bank accounts, right, for the companies. Well, I went and I sit there, and one of the ladies, she either knew me from the radio, one of the bankers, she knows me from the radio, but also my home equity line of credit was being done there. We had this sweet old man walk in, and he said, can you tell me what the CD rate, the certificate deposit rate is again? And you can tell he's doing it on a weekly basis at this point, type of thing. He's like, they're like, Mr. John Doe, it hasn't gone up much. It's at, for 5 years, 3% or whatever. And he's like, oh, because he's needing that return, right? Maybe he's living off of a set amount, and he needs that interest. There's a joke it's a horrible joke, but if a millionaire had $1 million sitting in the bank, if it's not in a CD or something like that, they're making 1/10 of 1%. They couldn't even afford to rent one of the trailers in my mobile home park, or they would struggle to, right? They couldn't live off of it. So with that being said,
When I talk about true private money lenders, I talk about the people who have money in savings who they want to make more than that 1/10 of 1%. I'm talking about people who have the retirement accounts like you were talking about, which most of the time you don't quantify people who you think, oh man, they worked at Entergy for 20 years, or they worked at Chevron for 30, or they worked at the school board. Name some type of employer that does a matching program, right? They worked there for a long time. Oh goodness, they had 60 grand or 100 grand or a million a few times. I was like, oh, okay. But here's the thing is, they're not liking the volatility of the stock market, and that's where a lot of their retirement account is right now, right? So I had a few people who said, hey, that's one of the main ways I buy my deals now. Anything that I buy with cash, I buy with private money from actual individuals, and these are those things. It is another problem that I find in the marketplace, and I offer a solution. One of the last deals I just bought was bought with a top producing real estate agent who had the money sitting. So take real estate agent out and pick salesperson, a top producing salesperson. One of my other private money lenders is a top producing salesperson, right? But they're in a different field, they're in medical. So at the end of the day, they have the money sitting in the bank, and they're like, hey, I don't want to go and learn what you've learned, Courtney. I'm looking for someone who's that is trustworthy and competent. If they're not trustworthy, you don't want to lend them money. But if they're also not competent, you also don't want to lend them. But if they're trustworthy and but not competent, that's the mix there. So there's a level of that. So be careful when you see advertisements for private money loans. You want to make sure. A lot of times it's hard money loans just disguised. But so true private. A lot of people come, hey Courtney, can you send me your private money lenders? I'm like, that's so relationship based. That's like they're like, hey, it's so they're not walking around the car that says I lend money. I'm not going to do that, right? Like they're not wanting that. And so that's why when he talked about standing in the room, he's like, because he's seen a lot of my deals, and it's people who say, hey, I don't want to go have that face with tenants. We're talking about that meeting next month about how to build wealth through notes and mortgages. That's what we're talking about. JV partners, you've got a few, right? Have you done it? Talk about the different types of strategies you've done that on.
So, I have a duplex in Gulfport that a buddy of mine, he was actually a business owner that had a very profitable business and really getting into real estate, doesn't have a lot of time. So we partnered on that, bought that property cash, which is also pretty much against my religion, but I did it anyway. Which worked out because it took us 6 months to get the damn thing up and running. We converted it to a short-term rental, so we had to basically fix it up and furnish it and do all that stuff. And with the problem of finding contractors and getting all the materials, that took a while. So we had very little holding costs because we put cash in. So that worked out well. The one that I'm talking about earlier, I'm doing this weekend. I'm working with a person on the West Coast that went and looked at the deal before I did, but she knew me, and then
Gulf
the
Coast.
wholesaler,
Gulf Coast.
Gulf, what'd I say?
West.
West Coast, I'm sorry, Gulf Coast.
Two different price points, Bob.
I got clients in 47 states, I'm all over the place, I just can't keep track. So she actually looked at it last weekend, and the wholesaler sent me the link like on Friday. I said, I've got a buyer looking at it this weekend. I said, okay, well, if that doesn't go through, send it to me and I'll look at it more seriously. And so she contacted me on Tuesday and said, yeah, they decided that the numbers didn't work out for them. Here's the stuff. And I asked, she told me some of the numbers and I asked her more questions. And then right at 15 minutes later, I get a text from the person that went to look at it and said, Bob, I think this is an opportunity, but my hard money lender just didn't want to put money into it. And it's like, I need someone, so I'm doing a joint venture, but I'm coming in as the expert in this one as opposed to the money guy. So, so I suggested ways to do it and had her, she's doing all the legwork and looking at all this stuff. So we're going to be talking tomorrow to figure out what paperwork we need. Because apparently I bought a house.
So if you guys are ever wanting to do a joint venture, there's a lot of people who say, Courtney, I'd like, whether it's trust issues, right, or it's, I see a lot of people who do this. It's for me and mine, right? First of all, when I see this, many times, they get 1/10 of the distance of someone who's willing to collaborate. So, if you ever want to watch a good video, we did a panel discussion on this on the Art of a JV deal on the YouTube channel. I brought on 2 people who I've partnered with. One of them, so I had partnered with them on wholesale deals, I had partnered with them on flips, and partnered with them on rentals. And one of them, both of the people on the panel was Paula Grange, my co-host of the radio show, and then Steve Keegery, who's a wholesaler and landlord on the South Shore. And we went through the nitty gritty. On the big pieces, let me just say this, paperwork, right? Literally, we've made the paperwork, even though there's a great relationship there, we made the paperwork as if we hated each other's guts. Because that's when you go to the paperwork. If they say, hey, Courtney, we're going to do this, I'm like, yeah, fine, go ahead and do it, right? Like, it's agreeable when there's a good relationship. If I'm like, well, the paperwork says we got to do, you know what I mean? Like, if you're pissed, that's what you're going to do. Here's the thing is, I'm a huge fan of building allies, okay? A lot of my private money has come from building those allies. A lot of the deals that I've done have come from building those allies. But anytime that I've wanted to really kind of level up, a lot of times what I've done is I've called in on people who, like for example, maybe some mentors. The very first time I wanted to do a subject to deal, I called on a mentor who had been doing them for decades. And I said, look, man, I'll give you a piece of the deal, I'll give you all the deal. I don't care, just show me how you do it. And I wanted to learn, right? And so, that's a huge part of it. You've got to pick the right people, because there's also been times that I didn't pick the right people. So keep that part in mind. Ask me how I know that part. We haven't been able to, again, that paperwork is important. But you need to vet people, right? I don't JV with just anyone. So a lot of times when people come to me and say, hey, Courtney, I want to learn from you, this, that, and the other. One of the biggest things I say, hey, look, bring me a deal. A lot of times it's wholesalers, right? Bring me a deal. If I buy the deal from you, I'll walk you through the steps. I'll show you what the paperwork looks like. I'll go walk the property with you, show you what I look for whenever I walk the property, all this stuff. But don't get me wrong, I will also point you to 100 videos, like I've already pointed you guys to about 20, right? I said, hey, there's all this information, but like at the end of the day, I'm not going to own a property with just anybody. I own properties with a few people, a few different people, right? So I'm not afraid to do that either. But at the end of the day, you need to know what that looks like. That means hiring an attorney, like figuring out the paperwork, but also vetting that person. Here's why. I used to be afraid of partnerships. But one of my mentors early on, because they told me about a partnership gone bad, where that person started going through a bankruptcy, and it was starting to rub off on them. And there were some headaches that came, like they were having to bail this partner out. They had issues. So again, don't get into it lightly. There's a difference between partnering with someone on a wholesale deal or partnering with someone on a flip, something that's more shorter term. But as far as owning property, that is a marriage we have gone on many dates, right? Seriously, we have gone on many, and we've had the hard conversations, right? Because imagine, so here's a very real reality. Some of my partners have been people who've brought the money. I don't do that very often because I can go find money, right? But if that's the case, you need to outline. I don't like to have two chiefs and no Indians, right? We're not all going to be running the show and doing the same task. You need to divide and conquer the responsibilities, right? But then there's other situations where, we're coming in and it's there's two investors and we're delineating the task, right? At that point, you need to say, hey, if, for example, there needs to be a new $10,000 roof pit on there, and we don't have, the business doesn't have the funds, okay, what if one person doesn't have that money and the other one does? It should not be like, you need to outline what happens, like you don't want one carrying the weight of the other. All those things you need to figure out. But here's the thing, that's where education comes into play. So we've both done partnerships.
Let me say this, go ahead.
When you do the LLC or a partnership, do you actually create an operating agreement that outlines all that? Okay.
Literally, it outlines. If Bob got pissed at me and said, Courtney's, I don't have enemies, but Courtney's biggest enemy in town, the person she doesn't like or whatever, I'm going to go sell my 50% ownership to them so that she's in the most, horrible situation or whatever. I'm not saying that hasn't ever happened in the world, but I'm sure someone probably thought of it, right? But you see what I'm saying? So, but we need to talk about, okay, this partnership shouldn't be to infinity and beyond. It should, what's the end date of it? It's not like a marriage where you're like, till death do us part, right? So you're saying, hey, okay. So for example, with some of my partnerships, it's saying, hey, at any given point, if one person wants out, they say, hey, and we built out, what does that look like? is there a 90-day offer period where the other person can offer? And at what rate? Is it at market rate? Do they need to get an appraisal? You know, what does that look like, right? There's some fine print there. That's where attorneys who see the ugly side build in some paperwork. So you're gonna.
So I had a client come to me a couple of years ago, and they had a friend that wanted to invest with them in a project, and they were doing a flip. And they said, sure, you can come in. Well, this friend who had no experience whatsoever in flipping houses, doing anything, wanted to have a say in almost everything that went on. And so you have to be careful. That's where you vet them. Just because someone's got money doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be, that it was more than just the interest you pay them or the profit. There's a lot of other stuff. So they ended up barely making any money on that project. But they basically wanted to just get out of it as soon as possible so they could stop that marriage, basically.
So there needs to be true yin and yang. Someone should, it shouldn't be two inexperienced people partnering together just to figure something out. I mean, don't get me wrong, but like, oftentimes that stuff like this happens where it's like, hey, where it's like the blind leading the blind. A lot of times what it'll look like is maybe one person's experienced, but one person's bringing the money. There needs to be someone has a strength and they're picking up someone else's weakness or whatever that looks like. There's a lot of benefit in that. Otherwise, you get two chiefs, no Indians. Okay. The other reality here is you need to really kind of outline some things, and you need to be able to make decisions. Right. Here's the other thing: is you also need to plan it out, because if one of you thinks it's a rental, the other one thinks it'll flip. That's going to be a fun conversation. So those things matter. The seller financing part. Many people, so right now, so as a creative real estate investor, a lot of brokers are like, hey, Courtney, come and speak on this. Or, you know, a lot of people say, hey, Courtney, do this. Like, at the end of the day, guys, this is a skill set. All of these things, the private money thing, it's a skill set. It's a mindset as well. You've got to go and educate yourself on it. So with private money, the Raising Private Capital, the Bigger Pockets book is good. There's also one called Getting the Money by Susan Lassiter-Lyons. It's a small book, but it's a really good book on private money. That book actually helps address the fact that you're not begging anyone for money. There's also some things where we should probably get this addressed some other time. I'm not a big fan of people saying, hey, I have a deal. I will give you 12% interest secured by da-da-da. Like, there's actually some regulation that you can't solicit money that way. So you do want to be careful. You want to make sure you know. So for me, one of the rules I go by is I have to know the person for at least 45 days. So if I get to meet someone and say, hey, guess what? Let's go have lunch. Let's talk. How about when I let you know? So the best time to raise money is not when you have the deal. Let me say that again. The best time to get money is not when you have the deal. It's figuring out your options beforehand.
So is that because you're running afoul of the sophisticated investor?
It's a security and SEC. So a big part of that is because you're guaranteeing a return. You see what I'm saying? So a big part of that is that general rule of thumb is I like to do 45 days. I have a few touches with them, whether it's a phone call or we go have coffee or we go have lunch or whatever, and we build that relationship. Because I'm not about to be like, oh, I just met you. Here, do you want to lend me $500,000? Right?
I saw a post on Facebook today where a person was saying, you know, stuff and saying, if you're invested in this, like, I'm going, dude, you know, what you're doing is illegal. You
Someone's
can't do
teaching it, and now like 20 people are doing it very consistently. And it's one of those things, some of the attorneys I know who are like, their red flags are very high. So with owner financing, creative financing, guys, those are skill sets. Here's the biggest thing. If you ever want to get into the creative financing world, get around creative real estate investors. Honestly, it's a subsect within the community, and I promise you, the deals have been out there. I got in the industry in 2014. If I've been able to do creative deals in this crazy market, you can do creative deals in any market, okay? And that is a skill set. Like I said, I even bought my own primary residence with that. And lastly, using other creative options. Look, that knowledge base is going to really help you, right? That's what this boils down to. But here's one of the things is when it comes down to the money part, people have made money only going to the bank and doing deals that way. Whether it's the residential one, like living, I know people who, builders. I know builders who, I know numerous people who all they use is it's the house they lived in, they kept it as rentals. Or this, that, or the other, right? Live-in flips or whatever. So I know people who've made their money
using just hard money, or just doing creative, or just doing partnerships. Here's the thing, they all have worked. They're all tried and true. And I'm not saying you need to use all of them. I'm saying find one, start researching it some more. We're introducing it to you today. Go ahead and do some more. There is a million podcasts, there is a million books, there's a million blogs. The big ground here is figure it out, start researching it, and start utilizing it on your deals. You can do deals using any one of these sources. Then you just have to educate yourself. And then here's the other thing, build your team correctly. So if you, again, go to Courtney10K.com, we actually have a few lenders on there. Ryan Schimpf with Angel Oak Loans. If you guys are in our Facebook group, I did a video with him the other day when I was at lunch with him. Because, for example, he's got 2 or 3 products that are great if you guys are looking at buying some properties, but maybe you don't have the W-2, right? Like one of them, he has it where it's just the bank loan statements, where they're not looking at your W-2 salaries, they're just looking at your bank statements. He's got another one is if you like maybe inherited a lot of money, and so you have some money sitting in the bank, or maybe you had a severance from a job or whatever, they can actually lend you money based on that cash collateral. So if you go to Courtney10K.com, they have some preferred vendors. All of his information is there. Ryan Camesso with First Equity Funding, they do fix and flip, so the hard money for the short-term deals, or they also do those asset-based loans. So if you want to do that, you maybe use your own cash, and then you say, hey, after 6 months, I want to refinance and get that cash back out so I can go buy a next property. They can do it to where they'll give you the 30-year in an LLC name, which the bank's not going to generally do that, and it's going to be fixed. So not every 5 years they're coming back and reassessing the interest rate or the deal. So those are, and it's asset-based. So they're not going to say, oh, well, Courtney, your debt to income is out of whack, meaning you have all these other loans on different properties. If you keep going through the bank, there's a limit of?
Well, it depends on the bank, but they have, most of them have about 10.
Okay, I asked because I don't know. Well, I only know by generally knowing, right? But with those asset-based loans, they're not reporting it to your credit, right? Because it's asset-based, it's in the loan's in the LLC's name, right? So a big part of that there is it's unlimited. So then what do? You take what, let's just say it's 8% interest right now, and some of you are cringing with that. You build it in as a part of the deal, right? You say that's an expense, the same way of replacing the roof is an expense. You build it into the deal, if the deal can support it, you use it. So with that being said, guys, ultimately, thank you so much with this. Look, guys, Bob is a huge resource. I can tell you that he comes to these meetings almost every single meeting. I know they're slammed with with the tax deadlines right now. But keep in mind, guys, at the end of the day, I don't want you guys to be like, hey, I've been wanting to invest in real estate for 20 years and another 20 go by because you can't figure out how to get around the money hurdle. And so that's a big goal here. Look, we have some cards here. My card's here, Bob's, Florida Lee, Law and Title, and then the Pelican, the property management companies over here. If you guys have any last final questions or anything like that? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, but I have a question for Cole.
Okay.
Hopefully I remember. Where did you take your first-time home buyers class?
I didn't take a first-time home buyer's class.
You didn't?
Did they require you?
No.
So my significant other, when they bought theirs, had to take it, and they did it online somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, like literally it was some online class because they were traveling and they did it from their computer. It was a requirement of the program they were in.
Yeah.
I took it at the REIA.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else?
I do have a question. When you set up your LLC with a partner that you talked about, you set up a set of a bank account just for that project or just for that deal?
So whenever you set up an LLC, you want to set up a bank account for the LLC. Like if you're doing one deal, you've got a big account. But if you have multiple deals going on within your LLC, just so you can track budget stuff, it's easier if you have a separate account and run everything through that account. That way, at the end of the year, when you're trying to do your taxes, you have all that. But yeah, you can do that. I mean, I have a client he's a flipper, and every flip he was doing, he had a separate account for it. Now he kept reusing the accounts when the flip was done. He'd go back and use the account again, use it a bit, and he just kept those open. But he did that so he could track the draws and he could track the funds and see how much he had left. And
Or like me, you don't do that. Unless you depending on your real, my account.
So, a lot of people like to set up LLCs, and there's not a legal requirement to get a bank account open for your LLC. The purpose of an LLC is limited liability protection, and it separates the LLC and that activity from yourself. Well, they can get at you through that LLC if it's called Pearson Incorporated LLCs. Used to have corporations where they create LLCs. It's the same concept, which means they can go after the owner if the owner's not treating the LLC as separate from themselves. Well, if you're not doing what a normal business would normally do, or expected to do, which is have a business checking account, and you're running everything out of your personal account, they're going right after you if you get sued. So that LLC doesn't help you. So you want to do everything you can to show that that LLC is legitimate, including having operating agreements, even if you're a single member LLC, which you don't need one, because if you're the owner and you appoint yourself the manager, it's like, so that means when you get up in the morning and look in the mirror and make a decision, you've just had an ownership meeting, and you've also instructed your managers on what to do. You don't have to document that. Well, you really have to document some of those things, because you put an operating agreement. The operating agreement says you need to document it. You didn't know which items you have to document and which ones don't.
Most people create LLCs because they want to, protect themselves, but most of them don't operate it right. So, for example, a big part of that's the money part, to not commingle the different money. So that's a big part to it. Now, if it's, for example, one of the biggest mistakes I made in the beginning was I only had one LLC, and I was wholesaling, I was flipping, I was having rentals. When I met him, he was like, no. So I do have one that's for my flips and wholesales, and then I have one that is for my my rentals, because those are seen differently. Think about this: short-term versus long-term stuff, right? Think about this: it's I'm turning the burden of these, but these, I've got tenants in them, so if something happened, I got sued to this. I don't want them being able to touch everything, right? So there is some of that you need to be strategic about. But with my partnerships, sometimes with my partnership, like for example, if it's a flip, my company might buy the property, and I might have a joint venture agreement with them that we both have. It doesn't always have to be an LLC, is my point. Mm-hmm. It just depends on the type of deal, and then sometimes we will create an LLC if we own maybe a rental together for a long, stuff like that. So it really is going to depend. Excellent. All right, you guys. I want to thank Bob. He did a great job today sharing these things. Thank you guys so much for coming. Make sure to square up with your tab, but feel free to find out who's in the room. Come check out the cards over here. And see you guys next Wednesday night in Hammond, and then on the 13th. You guys have a good one. Yes, next Hammond on next Wednesday in Hammond.
You gonna sign it?